Okay, everybody, this is Greg, and what we're going to do, we're going to talk about, we're going to continue from where we were before. We're going to be going ahead and talking about the what to a slave is the 4th of July. And here I have my hypoxia mask, and I'm just showing that this is my hypoxia mask is a mask to show again that certain things are a benefit on one side and it's a curse on the other. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to transition the settings. I'm going to take off the mask, and then we're going to proceed with the rest of the classes. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. What we listened to was the first part, and this is a very long speech. What I'm hoping to do is show my reactions as I'm listening to this for the first time, because I haven't listened to the entire whole speech. And so what I'll try to do is try not to be distracted and try to see if I can be a blessing to you and listening and give you my honest opinion as what's going on. All right, so I'm going to transition the screen so that you can see, and I'm going to take off my mask and then go back to what we had before. All right, 1 second. 3, 2, 1. Transition back. Yeah. Okay, I'm back, and what we're going to talk about is what we were talking about before. We're going to go ahead and listen to what is it to a slave? What to a slave is the 4th of July? We're going to go ahead and switch back to our live reactions, and you're going to be able to see that. What I did was that I actually found the spot on my computer, and I was able to locate the details for you. So let me go transition to that. So here we are right here. I'm going to go ahead and start the reading of Frederick Douglass, and here we go. Okay, so here it is.
Down. Yeah. We wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there, they that carried us away captive, required of us a song, and they who wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Fellow citizens, above your national, tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are, today, rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme, would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject, then fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see, this day, and its popular characteristics, from the slave's point of view. Standing, there, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare, with all my soul, that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past, or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse, I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man, whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be fight and just. But I fancy I hear some one of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more, and denounce less, would you persuade more, and rebuke less, your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But, I submit, where all is plain there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, no matter how ignorant he be, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws, in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl, shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, there will I argue with you that the slave is a man. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that, while we are reading, writing and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that, while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and, above all, confessing and worshipping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it? Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation, as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today, in the presence of Americans, dividing, and subdividing a discourse, to show that men have a natural right to freedom? Speaking of it relatively, and positively, negatively, and affirmatively. To do so, would be to make myself ridiculous, and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven, that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What, am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to bum their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No. I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What, then, remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman, cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? They that can, may, I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh! Had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would, today, pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire; it is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened, the conscience of the nation must be roused, the propriety of the nation must be startled, the hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
Yeah.
What, to the American slave, is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are, to him, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
You know, I have to admit that that is very intense. I mean, it's just like this is kind of the sum total of what is being said. What to the American slave is the 4th of July? And I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, and your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. You know, this is actually very intense. I mean, this is before the revolution happened. This is before slavery freedoms were given. This is 1852. Frederick Douglass speaking 1852. It wasn't until 1865 let's see, 13 years, 13 years later, that when the slaves were free. But then it was like many, many years. You had the Jim Crow laws, you had the Dred Scott cases, you have all these different cases that were set to make sure that the black people did not prosper. And many other countries around the world, when slavery ended, it was like it really ended. But it's like here in America, it's kind of messed up because the fact that they got their independence. This is a very interesting, very messed up thing. It's very interesting. I mean, it's like imagine giving this speech. I can't imagine myself giving this speech. It's like he a lot said. So let me just go on. But for the most part, that was something that I really kind of like. Wow, really like that's a very it would disgrace a nation of savages. Let's continue.
Savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States, at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me, that, for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. Take the American
Wow.
slave trade, which, we are told by the papers, is especially prosperous just now. Ex-Senator Benton tells us that the price of men was never higher than now. He mentions the fact to show that slavery is in no danger. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. It is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy, and millions are pocketed every year, by dealers in this horrid traffic. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called, in contradistinction to the foreign slave trade, the internal slave trade. It is, probably, called so, too, in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
Hmm.
That trade has long since been denounced by this government, as piracy. It has
Hmm.
been denounced with burning
Piracy.
words, from the high places of the nation, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, to put an end to it, this nation keeps a squadron, at immense cost, on the coast of Africa. Everywhere, in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade, as a most inhuman traffic,
This I didn't
opposed
know.
alike to the laws of God and of man. The duty to extirpate and destroy it, is admitted even by our doctors of divinity. In order to put an end to it, some of these last have consented that their colored brethren, nominally free, should leave this country, and establish themselves on the western coast of Africa. It is,
Wow.
however, a notable fact that, while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Wow.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country, and crowd the highways of the nation, with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers, armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children, from the
Mm-mm.
Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly, or in lots, to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field, and the deadly sugar mill. Mark the sad procession, as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths, as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man, with locks thinned and grey. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle, the fetters clank, and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream, that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard, was the sound of the slave whip, the scream you heard, was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on. Follow the drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction, see men examined like horses, see the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade, as it exists, at this moment, in the ruling part of the United States.
Wow. 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 I never heard this before. I've never heard this before. This is real, real legit. What is the 4th of July? Oh man, man, oh man, that's terrible.
States. I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me the American slave trade is a terrible reality. When a child, my soul was often pierced with a sense of its horrors. I lived on Philpott Street, Fells Point, Baltimore, and have watched from the wharves, the slave ships in the basin, anchored from the shore, with their cargoes of human flesh, waiting for favorable winds to waft them down the Chesapeake. There was, at that time, a grand slave mart kept at the head of Pratt Street, by Austin Woldfolk. His agents were sent into every town and county in Maryland, announcing their arrival, through the papers, and on flaming handbills headed "Cash for Negroes." These men were generally well-dressed men, and very captivating in their manners. Ever ready to drink, to treat, and to gamble. The fate of many a slave has depended upon the turn of a single card, and many a child has been snatched from the arms of its mother by bargains arranged in a state of brutal drunkenness. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens, and drive them, chained, to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number have been collected here, a ship is chartered, for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile, or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night, for since the anti-slavery agitation, a certain caution is observed. In the deep, still darkness of midnight I have been often aroused by the dead heavy footsteps, and the piteous cries of the chained gangs that passed our door. The anguish of my boyish heart was intense, and I was often consoled, when speaking to my mistress in the morning, to hear her say that the custom was very wicked, that she hated to hear the rattle of the chains, and the heart-rending cries. I was glad to find one who sympathized with me in my horror. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is, today, in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South, I see the bleeding footsteps, I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity, on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken, to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight. Is this the land your fathers loved, the freedom which they toiled to win? Is this the earth whereon they moved? Are these the graves they slumber in? But a still more inhuman, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. By that act, Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated, New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States. The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad republican domain is hunting ground for men. Not for thieves and robbers, enemies of society, merely, but for men guilty of no crime.
Wow.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state, your lords, nobles and ecclesiastics enforce, as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country, and to your God, that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains, and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children, dependent on them for bread, but of this, no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage, and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included. For black men there are neither law, justice, humanity, not religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime, and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and 5, when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient, under this hell-black enactment, to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side, is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world, that, in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges, who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe, and are bound, in deciding in the case of a man's liberty, to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation. I doubt if there be another nation on the globe, having the brass and the baseness to put such a law on the statute book. If any man in this assembly thinks differently from me in this matter, and feels able to disprove my statements, I will gladly confront him at any suitable time and place he may select. I take this law to be one of the grossest infringements of Christian liberty, and, if the churches and ministers of our country were not stupidly blind, or most wickedly indifferent, they, too, would so regard it.
Wow.
At the very moment that they are
church.
thanking God for the enjoyment of civil and religious liberty, and for the right to worship God according to the dictates of their own consciences, they are utterly silent in respect to a law which robs religion of its chief significance, and makes it utterly worthless to a world lying in wickedness.
Yes.
Did this law concern the mint, anise and cumin, abridge the fight to sing psalms, to partake of the sacrament, or to engage in any of the ceremonies of religion, it would be smitten by the thunder of 1,000 pulpits. A general shout would go up from the church, demanding repeal, repeal, instant repeal. And it would go hard with that politician who presumed to solicit the votes of the people without inscribing this motto on his banner. Further, if this demand were not complied with, another Scotland would be added to the history of religious liberty, and the stern old Covenanters would be thrown into the shade. A John Knox would be seen at every church door, and heard from every pulpit, and Fillmore would have no more quarter than was shown by Knox, to the beautiful, but treacherous Queen Mary of Scotland. The fact that the Church of our country, with fractional exceptions, does not esteem the fugitive slave law as a declaration of war against religious liberty, implies that that church regards religion simply as a form of worship, an empty ceremony, and not a vital principle, requiring active benevolence, justice, love, and goodwill towards man. It esteems sacrifice above mercy, psalm singing above right doing, solemn meetings above practical righteousness. A worship that can be conducted by persons who refuse to give shelter to the houseless, to give bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked, and who enjoin obedience to a law forbidding these acts of mercy, is a curse, not a blessing to mankind. The Bible addresses all such persons as scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, who pay tithe of mint, anise, and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. But the church of this country is not only indifferent to the wrongs of die slave, it actually takes sides with the oppressors. It has made itself the bulwark of American slavery, and the shield of American slave hunters. Many of its most eloquent divines, who stand as the very lights of the church, have shamelessly given the sanction of religion and the Bible to the whole slave system.
Wow.
They have taught that man may, properly, be a slave, that the relation of master and slave is ordained of God, that to send back an escaped bondman to his master is clearly the duty of all the followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, and this horrible blasphemy is palmed off upon the world for Christianity. For my part, I would say, welcome infidelity. Welcome atheism. Welcome anything in preference to the gospel, as preached by those divines. They convert the very name of religion into an engine of tyranny, and barbarous cruelty, and serve to confirm more infidels, in this age, than all the infidel writings of Thomas Paine, Voltaire, and Bolingbroke, put together, have done. These ministers make religion a cold and flinty-hearted thing, having neither principles of right action, nor bowels of compassion. They strip the love of God of its beauty, and leave the throng of religion a huge, horrible, repulsive form. It is a religion for oppressors, tyrants, man-stealers, and thugs. It is not that pure and undefiled religion which is from above, and which is first pure, then peaceable, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. But a religion which favors the rich against the poor, which exalts the proud above the humble, which divides mankind into two classes, tyrants and slaves, which says to the man in chains, stay there, and to the oppressor, oppress on. It is a religion which may be professed and enjoyed by all the robbers and enslavers of mankind. It makes God a respecter of persons, denies his fatherhood of the race, and tramples in the dust the great truth of the brotherhood of man. All this we affirm to be true of the popular church, and the popular worship of our land and nation, a religion, a church, and a worship which, on the authority of inspired wisdom, we pronounce to be an abomination in the sight of God. In the language of Isaiah, the American church might be well addressed, bring no more vain oblations, incense is an abomination unto me, the new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with, it is iniquity even the solemn meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hateth. They are a trouble to me, I am weary to bear them, and when ye spread forth your hands I will hide mine eyes from you. Yet, when ye make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood, cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge for the fatherless, plead for the widow. The American church is guilty, when viewed in connection with what it is doing to uphold slavery, but it is superlatively guilty when viewed in connection with its ability to abolish slavery. The sin of which it is guilty is one of omission as well as of commission. Albert Barnes but uttered what the common sense of every man at all observant of the actual state of the case will receive as truth, when he declared that there is no power out of the church that could sustain slavery an hour, if it were not sustained in it. Let the religious press, the pulpit, the Sunday school, the conference meeting, the great ecclesiastical, missionary, Bible and tract associations of the land array their immense powers against slavery and slaveholding, and the whole system of crime and blood would be scattered to the winds, and that they do not do this involves them in the most awful responsibility of which the mind can conceive. In prosecuting the anti-slavery enterprise, we have been asked to spare the church, to spare the ministry, but how, we ask, could such a thing be done?
Wow.
We are met on the threshold of our efforts for the redemption of the slave, by the church and ministry of the country, in battle arrayed against us, and we are compelled to fight or flee. From what quarter, I beg to know, has proceeded a fire so deadly upon our ranks, during the last 2 years, as from the northern pulpit? As the champions of oppressors, the chosen men of American theology have appeared men, honored for their so-called piety, and their real learning. The Lords of Buffalo, the Springs of New York, the Lathrops of Auburn, the Coxes and Spencers of Brooklyn, the Gannets and Sharps of Boston, the DeWays of Washington, and other great religious lights of the land, have, in utter denial of the authority of him, by whom the professed to he called to the ministry, deliberately taught us, against the example or the Hebrews and against the remonstrance of the apostles, they teach that we ought to obey man's law before the law of God.
Wow.
My spirit wearies of such blasphemy, and how such men can be supported, as the standing types and represent.
Wow, this is such a rebuke. This is such a rebuke on the churches. This is such a horrible rebuke on the churches that this is like I've never heard this before, and I never heard such a rebuke. This is like, they always talk about in classes, we have our classes, and then you talk about the history and how the churches and how this and that, and we went to many churches. My wife and I and the kids and I, we went to many churches. And we worked in some church. We worked in one church for like 10 years, another church we worked for 1 year, and it was always talking about the freedom in Christ. And we know that there's freedom in Christ because the Bible says it. But also, I mean, our life, we have proof that it happened for us. Living in Christ is freedom, and the Bible says, "He who the Son sets free is free indeed." But then you have this situation here where you're faced with like what they're saying is saying that the church had a duty, and for so long, I see from 1776 to about 1852, they had a duty to stand against slavery. I know slavery was a little bit longer than that, but 1776, when they declared their freedom from from Britain, to have them get their freedom, and then here it is, from the years of 1776 or 1787 to 1852, slavery was still alive in the United States. And then, I mean, that's just crazy. It is really crazy. It wasn't until 1861. That's another. There's 9 more years before the Emancipation Proclamation, which really didn't do anything by it, mind you. But it was 1863. 1863 is when the is when oh goodness, I messed with my times. Hold on a second. Let me check it real quick. All right, all right. So I have on this here my statue, and so I have here the soul is free. The soul is free, and spirit free. 30 AD when Jesus died on the cross for our sins. Then we have 1863, not 1861, 1863 was the Emancipation Proclamation, which didn't really do anything. It just showed that pretty much that there is a freedom from slavery. Um, it wasn't until you have the Juneteenth, July 19th. Juneteenth was in Galveston, Texas. That was what do you call the ceremonial freedom, and then you have the last one, which is you have the amend pretty much the December 18th, the constitutional free, when they made the constitutional amendment, the 13th Amendment, and then 13th Amendment, then you got the 14th Amendment, then you got the 15th Amendment, and these amendments were right to vote, and then also that no more slavery in the United States. But this 13th Amendment was no more slavery. But like what someone said, there's no mention of the Negroes being free from slave, but it said that those are enslaved. But they say when you lose your rights, you commit a crime, you lose all rights to be free. So this is like what I have. I have a person here, a slave lady, and she's reaching for the cross for deliverance, and the deliverance, real soul freedom comes from Christ. The sad part about all this is that when you really think about what is being said, that they have actually, it's such an indictment on the church at the time, because let's see, if we just do the math, the math on it, how long is, let me see, do a calculator real quick. Let me see, do a calculator real quick on that. Just have it there, a calculator. All right, so you have a calculator, and you're looking at 17, let's see, 17, let's see, 1852 minus 1776. You're looking at 76 years. So for another 76 years, 76 years, by the time of him writing his speech and explaining his speech to the room that he's in, what has happened is that there have been no freedom. The slave was continued to be in slavery, was continuing to be on the books. So it wasn't until, let's see, let's change that up now. Let's go back and delete some. So you look at, let's see, what is it? 1865. 1865 minus 1776, you're looking at 89 years. So slavery continued for 89 years, right after America had gotten its freedom from the British, 1776, right? For another 89, almost 90 more years before it was done. But then you look back at that, and you have another 100 years before the Jim Crow laws were removed, and then 1965, and then 1865, 1965, the Civil Rights Act. So it's another 100 years. So you have 190 years more. Well, so this is 90 years of slavery continue. Another 100 years before it was civil rights laws were enacted. And then they went ahead and did the whole thing with the New Deal and all that stuff, where they just went ahead and just did further damage. But let me go ahead and let's continue on with what's being said. Um, what he is saying is so powerful to me. My mind is blown. I'm just like totally baffled by what has happened. We're almost done. There's a couple more things to go, but let it be said. Okay, so here it goes.
Representatives of Jesus
Whew,
Christ, is a mystery which I leave others to penetrate. In speaking of the American Church,
back
my
up just a little
spirit
bit.
wearies of such
Yeah.
blasphemy, and how such men can be supported, as the standing types and representatives of Jesus Christ, is a mystery which I leave others to penetrate. In speaking of the American Church, however, let it be distinctly understood that I mean the great mass of the religious organizations of our land.
There
There
are
are exceptions,
exceptions.
and I thank God that there are. Noble men may be found, scattered all over these northern states, of whom Henry Ward Beecher of Brooklyn, Samuel J. May of Syracuse, and my esteemed friend Reverend R. R. Raymond on the platform, are shining examples, and let me say further, that upon these men lies the duty to inspire our ranks with high religious faith and zeal, and to cheer us on in the great mission of the slave's redemption from his chains. One is struck with the difference between the attitude of the American Church towards the anti-slavery movement, and that occupied by the churches in England towards a similar movement in that country. There, the Church, true to its mission of ameliorating, elevating, and improving the condition of mankind, came forward promptly, bound up the wounds of the West Indian slave, and
Wow.
restored him to his liberty. There, the question of emancipation was a highly religious question. It was demanded, in the name of humanity, and according to the law of the living God. The Sharps, the Clarksons, the Wilberforces, the Buxtons, and Burchells and the Nibbs, were alike famous for their piety, and for their philanthropy. The anti-slavery movement there was not an anti-church movement, for the reason that the church took its full share in prosecuting that movement, and the
Wow.
anti-slavery movement in this country will cease to be an anti-church movement, when the church of this country shall assume a favorable instead or a hostile position towards that movement.
Wow.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent.
Hmm.
You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation, as embodied in the two great political parties, is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 millions of your countrymen.
3
You hurl your
million.
anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water, but the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty. You shed tears over fallen Hungary, and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against her oppressors, but, in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence, and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America. You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet, you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a threepenny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country.
Wow.
You profess to believe that, of one blood, God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men, everywhere to love one another, yet you notoriously hate, and glory in your hatred, all men whose skins are not colored like your own. You declare, before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that, among these are, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and yet, you hold securely, in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a seventh part of the inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie.
Oh, wow.
It destroys your moral power abroad, it corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion, it makes your name a hissing, and a byword to a mocking earth. It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress, it is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education, it fosters pride, it breeds insolence, it promotes vice, it shelters crime, it is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet, you cling to it, as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Oh! Be warned! Be warned! A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom, the venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away, and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever. But it is answered in reply to all this, that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is a part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this Republic.
Oh, wow.
Then, I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers stooped, basely stooped, to palter with us in a double sense, and keep the word of promise to the ear, but break it to the heart. And instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, they were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least, so I believe. There is not time now to argue the constitutional question at length, nor have I the ability to discuss it as it ought to be discussed. The subject has been handled with masterly power by Lysander Spooner, Esq., by William Goodell, by Samuel E. Sewell, Esq., and last, though not least, by Gerrit Smith, Esq. These gentlemen have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour. Fellow citizens, there is no matter in respect to which, the people of the North have allowed themselves to be so ruinously imposed upon, as that of the pro-slavery character of the Constitution. In that instrument I hold there is neither warrant, license, nor sanction of the hateful thing, but, interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Is it at the gateway? Or is it in the temple? It is neither. While I do not intend to argue this question on the present occasion, let me ask, if it be not somewhat singular that, if the Constitution were intended to be, by its framers and adopters, a slave-holding instrument, why neither slavery, slave-holding, nor slave can anywhere be found in it? What would be thought of an instrument, drawn up, legally drawn up, for the purpose of entitling the city of Rochester to a tract of land, in which no mention of land was made? Now, there are certain rules of interpretation, for the proper understanding of all legal instruments. These rules are well established. They are plain, common-sense rules, such as you and I, and all of us, can understand and apply, without having passed years in the study of law. I scout the idea that the question of the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of slavery is not a question for the people. I hold that every American citizen has a fight to form an opinion of the Constitution, and to propagate that opinion, and to use all honorable means to make his opinion the prevailing one. Without this fight, the liberty of an American citizen would be as insecure as that of a Frenchman. Ex-Vice President Dallas tells us that the Constitution is an object to which no American mind can be too attentive, and no American heart too devoted.
Whoa.
He further says, the Constitution, in its words, is plain and intelligible, and is meant for the homebred, unsophisticated understandings of our fellow citizens. Senator Berrien tells us that the Constitution is the fundamental law, that which controls all others. The Charter of our liberties, which every citizen has a personal interest in understanding thoroughly. The testimony of Senator Breese, Lewis Cass, and many others that might be named, who are everywhere esteemed as sound lawyers, so regard the Constitution. I take it, therefore, that it is not presumption in a private citizen to form an opinion of that instrument. Now, take the Constitution according to its plain reading, and I defy the presentation of a single pro-slavery clause in it. On the other hand, it will be found to contain principles and purposes, entirely hostile to the existence of slavery.
Wow.
I have detained my audience entirely too long already. At some future period I will gladly avail myself of an opportunity to give this subject a full and fair discussion. Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation, which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world, and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done. Long-established customs of hurtful character could formerly fence themselves in, and do their evil work with social impunity. Knowledge was then confined and enjoyed by the privileged few, and the multitude walked on in mental darkness.
Wow.
But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. It makes its pathway over and under the sea, as well as on the earth. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are, distinctly heard on the other. The far-off and almost fabulous Pacific rolls in grandeur at our feet. The celestial empire, the mystery of ages, is being solved. The fiat of the Almighty, let there be light, has not yet spent its force. No abuse, no outrage whether in taste, sport, or avarice, can now hide itself from the all-pervading light. The iron shoe, and crippled foot of China must be seen, in contrast with nature. Africa must rise and put on her yet unwoven garment. Ethiopia shall stretch out her hand unto God. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it. God speed the year of Jubilee the wide world o'er, when from their galling chains set free, oppressed shall vilely bend the knee, and wear the yoke of tyranny like brutes no more. That year will come, and freedom's reign, to man his plundered fights again restore. God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood, the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil, good, not blow for blow, that day will come all feuds to end. And change into a faithful friend each foe.
Wow.
God speed the hour, the glorious hour, when none on earth shall exercise a lordly power, nor in a tyrant's presence cower, but all to manhood's stature tower, by equal birth. That hour will come, to each, to all, and from his prison house, the thrall go forth. Until that year, day, hour, arrive, with head, and heart, and hand I'll strive, to break the rod, and rend the gyve, the spoiler of his prey deprive, so witness heaven. And never from my chosen post, whate'er the peril or the cost, be driven.
This was a very intense, very good speech. Very, very good. Right to the point, and it ends with encouragement. Went to the slave is the 4th of July. It doesn't mean anything until the people who would talk about freedom will also acknowledge the fact that slavery should have come to an end much sooner in this country than 90 years later. Right, 90 years later, well, this was still being written. It was another 100. I just did the math and I forget it, but pretty much for 1863. 1863. 1865 is when slavery ended in America. And the after effects of that, it was 100, man, almost 100 years, 90 years afterwards. Let me do the math again just to make sure. Let's do the math one more time. Calculator. The calculator of that is you got 1865. All right, the number is 181865 minus 1776. You're looking at 89, 90 years, 90 years, 90 years in slavery until the people gained their freedom. 90 more years. It's a lifetime. That means a whole bunch of generations. Every 20 years is a generation. So, what do we learn from this? I learned that this is a very important document. It speaks to the hypocrisy of they which know better and didn't do better. The Bible talks about that. It says, to him who knows to do good and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. And that's what happens whenever we commit a crime or we do something that's not supposed to be. We have hurt ourselves. We have done things that we shouldn't do. And especially with this thing regarding slavery, slavery has shown itself, it has shown its hand, that its hand is a bad hand, and that how America did not um, give up on it when they should have was very was very sad. But very sad, and not only sad, but treacherous and demonstrative that it was that they knew it was bad, willing to go and fight and put their navy to block slavery. But in America, they had slavery in America. So just gotta pray for wisdom and God's wisdom for everything. I was glad that we were able to see this message and be able to see the works of Frederick Douglass, and just be able to hear that. It's the first time I actually got a chance to actually hear this, and it's my fault. I should have heard it sooner. I really should have. It's just that the thing is, when I hear this, I just think about like how um, lives could be changed, how people's lives could have been different, and how me hearing this for the first time, and I'm like what 40, almost 45 years old, and for hearing this for the first time in its entirety, I've heard mention of it, but never, and so that's my fault for not hearing it. But now it's like just understand that 90 years from the time of America getting its freedom from the British to when they freed the slaves, and they were oppressors to their own people. That's something. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for listening with me. I'm gonna make this a live video soon. I'm gonna be able to put it up. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening and for watching. Again, thank you because this has been a very interesting like class, and just have to hear that that blew my mind. And so definitely take a look at, read for yourself. What to the Slave is the 4th of July. Read about it, learn about it. Learn what's good about it, and you can hear it for yourself. I'm gonna show you the picture. I'm gonna get up real quick and show you the picture that I painted. Bear back 1 second. I'm gonna show you the picture that I painted, and here is what it is. This is the picture, the completed picture of what I painted of Frederick Douglass, and so you can see his this I this is my first time ever painting a picture, going from a drawing to a picture like that. And so I did that because I wanted to just kind of show, as I was working the stuff that was being worked on, and wanted to just kind of give a homage to to a man who spoke the truth when he had the opportunity. So that's kind of a good thing, and I just pray for all of us to speak the truth when opportunity permits. All right. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. Again, please like and subscribe to our channel, and I just wanted to say thank you so much again for watching. Again, just you can find us in the thing, find us our names and information there. So again, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you all the best. You know, um, yeah, thank you so much. God bless you, and good night. Thank you.